Mm. Hey everyone. So, I've recorded some time ago a video where I was speaking a little bit about this, and I may upload that sometime in the near future. I keep seeing friends, people on social media who have been given labels or have accepted labels of varying psychiatric disorders, as well as the overarching umbrella term of neurodivergent, as opposed to neurotypical. And of course, when we take labels, we do so with the hope that we are moving closer to truth, or that we are moving closer to some kind of perceived help. And I've seen this for some time, and I've spoken about it before. And it seems that people in general who are sensitive to themselves are catching up inwardly to the fact that not only are these labels unhelpful, but they're ultimately damaging and alienating within oneself and within the so-called wider field of people who would also use these labels to refer to themselves. Some of my friends that have been diagnosed with ADHD and who have used that label as a way to try to navigate a so-called non-ADHD equipped world have been finding themselves unable to relate to a lot of the content that is put out there, whether by ADHDers or non-ADHDers, for how to navigate, a non-ADHD world, and finding it unhelpful and, in fact, simply doing a little bit more psychological damage. And here is my take on all of that. And that is, as someone who is, obviously a little bit different myself, something I don't even think about anymore because there's no need for comparison. And that's the key right there, is that you I'm looking for the best entry point here because it's a lot. It's a large thing that we're looking at. And when things aren't addressed in a way that appears appropriate to people, they freak and stop listening. So I'm just looking for the right entry point here. All labels that are at one time useful in one's psychological journey of development, at some point or another become a cage and totally unuseful, useless, in fact detrimental to one's self-awareness. It should be obvious, I think, that we live in a world which is structured, deliberately it has been structured in every way to serve the purposes of the economic engine. And despite all of the high register words which are used to describe the value system, or the character values that are desired, the character traits which are desired within the system, essentially what our entire socio-cultural and economic and civilizational structure is one of exploitation. All of the institutions that are pillars of our current civilizational structure are exploitative because the society itself is based on exploitation. A human being is not meant to live this way. So when you, as a human being, are sensitive to your own exploitation and the exploitation of all human beings and of all forms of life on the planet today, naturally you don't feel all right. Naturally you don't feel okay, and naturally you feel that as a human being, the very structures within which we are told that we're obligated to live and be and behave are totally inhumane and inhuman. And the very diagnosis of being ill at ease, being psychologically disordered or disabled in some way is a direct reflection of the social structure within which we live. I would go so far as to say point blank to you that you are not disabled. You appear to be disabled because the way in which you function naturally is not as expediently exploitable. And when you're not expediently exploitable, you're given some label that's slapped on you so you can go try to fix that, which simply means to make yourself more expediently exploitable. And to allow the outer circumstances of the current social system to shape your worldview and to shape the way that you see and understand yourself is a grave injustice against yourself. And so many of these labels that appear initially to be liberating are really shackles in their own right. You're told that people are supposed to function this way and be this way and yada yada, right? And then suddenly there's this movement in which the term neurodivergent is used, and it's used to describe people who aren't neurotypical, right? Well, what does neurotypical mean basically? People who don't seem to possess or display any problems in following the protocol of the exploitative society. And neurodivergent refers to people who do present difficulties in following the exploitative protocol and blueprint pattern of the socioeconomic engine. And I offer to you a perspective that the so-called neurotypical means conditioned. It's not a state of the natural brain, it's a conditioned state. The brain is plastic. It's very elastic, it's flexible. When brains accept conditioning, they become mechanical. They become like machines. When a brain either doesn't accept the conditioning or accepts conditioning and then begins to rebel against it or move away from it but still retains part of it and then conditions itself in a sort of antithetical way, in an oppositional way, because of an incomplete, what I would call an incomplete integration or an incomplete awakening or an incomplete individualization, then, to use varying words, but essentially conditioning was partially accepted and then there was a modification made to it. This we call neurodivergence. And that word seems, people, that word is used for all sorts of things, whether it's a biophysical or a biopsychological ailment, right? Something like, perhaps somebody with cerebral palsy, where the system, biologically has its particular mode of functioning, which then may also be coupled with, having what you can call an artistic brain. I didn't say autistic, I said artistic, There may be some, what we would now call autism there, but an artistic brain, which means, right, a brain that perceives what is often not perceived. So a sensitive human being, a human being who is sensitive to life and to being. And a human being is supposed to be sensitive. A human being is supposed to be conscious. That's what it means to be human. And so accepting these labels, these psychological labels of neurodivergence and ADHD and things like that, is allowing the conditioned world, that is the violent world, to define you in relation to its perception of your functionality towards its exploitative ends. And as a conscious human being, that's unconscionable. That's just absolutely fucking vile. And I have to say to you, I hope you can hear this, that you will never find peace or rest or any kind of deep abiding joy in your being that's unperturbable as long as you're allowing the violent, exploitative world to define you. Are you willing to simply meet yourself and meet everybody as they are without the need to label, without the need to refer to yourself as being abnormal? There's nothing abnormal about you. Every nervous system has its needs. Every body has its needs. Bodies are not the same. Consciousness is the same. Consciousness is consciousness. But every nervous system has its particular specifications. And we live in a world where, for the sake of expedient exploitation, there's a psychological myth, a socio-psychological myth, that all nervous systems and all bodies and can all be treated with a one-size-fits-all external standard. And that's obviously as insane as making a single one-size-fits-all piece of clothing and giving it to every human being. It has no meaning. Let's pull out completely and start here. In order for civilization to be civilization, there are 7 basic things that it must offer. Must. Otherwise, it's a violent, exploitative civilization which could only result in its own destruction and the destruction of everything in its wake. If you haven't noticed, it's a giant burning out machine that's very quickly eating everything up, destroying everything. Every civilization that is worthy of the title civilization must provide for the security, for the survival of all of its inhabitants, its constituents, and namely in these 7 ways. Housing, food, clean, healthy, organic food, clean water, education, including tertiary, health care, universal basic income, and access to utilities and amenities, including data and internet. Without any one of those 7 basic functions, needs of survival being met, implies quite directly that the society, that the civilization is not only uncivilized, it's a giant plantation. It's a slave state. It's violent. A human being, naturally, without the entire natural world being dominated by governmental forces, would simply be able to walk out into the open land, build a structure, create a little farmstead next to a river. You'd be able to eat, you'd be able to live, to sleep, to drink. You'd have your knowledge, your traditional knowledge of herbs and medicine. Not to mention simply the fact that you'd be eating off of the land and living naturally. Your sickness would anyway come way down. In the event that you were sick, there you are with plants. And in the rare case that you did need some kind of invasive procedure, well, we've always had surgical arts, and anyway, we're getting to the point of there's no reason why access should or would be denied anyway in a just, humane, civilized world. But rarely, when one is living well and properly, is that kind of medical intervention, which today is considered the norm, even necessary. So, a human being naturally, by the very faculties of nature and the earth and consciousness itself, is given the right to shelter, is given the right to food, is given the right to water. And of course, whatever kind of work one can find to do, that one wants to do, that one is capable of doing, by nature, not by human slave drivers. Forced labor is not a thing of nature. There's always work to do in the name of survival, but human beings have found very wonderful ways of doing that, and today, with the technology that we have, there's no need for survival to be a competition. In fact, that's why we left the jungles and began building settlements, in order to ensure a streamlined survival so that we could focus on higher affairs. Life, we're not here to struggle to survive. That's why we left the jungle. And we live today in a world in which the labor of our ancestors has already ensured, by laps and laps and laps and laps and laps, that there's absolutely no need to toil en masse for survival's sake any longer. Any civilization, so if the civilization itself, by virtue of its military, its government, disallows human beings from simply going into the woods, building a house, farming, drawing water from a river, and setting up shop, so to speak, without having to pay anything, right? Because it's free. Consciousness, nature, God has given us the right to live here on this planet. And when a government comes in and says, the only way now that you're allowed to live here is through the means of this approved currency, which you can only earn by doing an approved taxable job, then your very means and manner of survival, which in truth is up to nobody but the source of creation and nature, by virtue of the natural reality of being human on this planet, now must be approved in every way by the government, by the civilizational body of approval. The only way for that to be just, the only way for civilizational living to be just, is for all members of civilization to be guaranteed good housing, adequate housing, with space for a human being to be a human being, clean, healthy, organic food, which also then means plenty of work for farmers in a much more sustainable, healthy way, clean water, education, healthcare, a universal basic income, and access to utilities and amenities, including data and internet. This is what makes a society a society. This is what makes a civilization a civilization. This is what allows an economy to flourish in a way that's actually meaningful. It's what allows the sciences and the arts to flourish in a way that's actually meaningful. When everything is a matter of competition, Science and the arts suffer. Everything suffers. If scientists were not in competition with one another for patents and grants and so on, you know how much farther ahead we'd be in scientific advancement right now? In every single way. If education and all of these basic things were met, human beings all over the world would be living in such a fantastic way. There wouldn't be, people don't like to hear this, but we do have a population problem. People have sex to pump out children, which there's no means to take care of, and the children are often all over the world. People have children for their own personal selfish reasons, because they're bored, because they want some creature to dump their psychological nonsense into. Now, let's not go into all of that. But when a society is well educated, the human beings are focused on higher pursuits. Human beings handle life in a much more, especially when that education is holistic and well-rounded, not when it's tailored to the functioning of a specific economic engine, which our classical education has been, at least modern classical. True classical education is something else. And that's what must come back. But when human beings are guaranteed survival, they're able to do exactly what's needed. And then naturally, of course, you can make money all you want. And you can upgrade and you can buy bigger houses and better cars. Obviously, there's nothing preventing anybody from doing that. But basically, if human beings are not treated with dignity like human beings in the world, that is not only an expression of poison, but can only lead to more poison, more toxification. So our entire way of looking at life is wrong. Our entire way of understanding life is wrong. Our entire way of understanding ourselves is wrong. And so naturally, no labels that are put upon you, or that you discover and resonate with, at least partially or for some time, can ever fully satisfy that quest to really know yourself and be at peace with yourself, and to find what works for you as a human being living in the world. Because all of those labels are labels that are designed by the forces and factors of enslavement, of oppression, naturally. Naturally. They're part of the psychological structure of the world, which is violent. So, the only way out of this is to be free inwardly. To be free. And then to be a beacon of that freedom. To simply be as you are, in every way, without the need to justify it, to explain it, to label it as being different or wrong or diseased or disabled. You are you. You are you. Disabled may be a fine adjective in certain circumstances, but the world feeling inaccessible to so many individuals for so many different reasons is not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because our current world model, well, it's passing away. It may seem like a little bit too slow for some, but the world model which we've currently come from is one of pure exploitation. It's not fit for human beings, it's fit for cattle. We've built a society, we've built a world in which human beings are treated like livestock. And the livestock shouldn't even be treated the way that they're treated. But human beings are seen as units. They're seen as thralls. They're seen as a resource, as an object to exploit. And in this whole exploitative mechanism, there are so many labels that people are given and internalize and believe. So I'm offering the invitation to drop all the labels. And to the extent that you do use any labels, you use them only as pure utility. That you do not internalize them and believe them as they're defined by the society or by the counter society. It makes no difference. The counter society's definitions are informed by the normative, the mainstream society's definitions. And so any definition whatsoever is in direct contact with any and all definition. So if you must use definition to navigate the world of form, insofar as you're dealing with unconscious people, it's fine. But do you see that when you're with conscious people, I didn't say people that believe themselves to be this or that or the other because of their political stance. I mean an actual conscious being. An actual conscious being. When you're with an actual conscious being, you're not questioned. Because an actual conscious being is a sovereign being who understands sovereignty, who's aware of the sovereignty of every human being. And as a sovereign being, I can speak or not speak. I can do or not do. And everybody has that right. A sovereign being is not going to put a funny label on another sovereign being because of the way that they like to eat their noodles. Or because of how they deal with time. Do you understand what I'm saying? And why are there labels about time and so on? Exploitation, right? If you're 1 minute late to work, you're a very naughty person. You're very bad. Bad, bad, bad. What? And what kind of work is it? It's shit that no one gives a fuck about. Again, it's exploitative. Human beings are not meant to live like this. Obviously everyone's depressed and anxious. Obviously everyone's melting down. We don't live in a humane world. So, if you must operate in the world, and we're here, we're going to operate in the world, are you willing to stand back and just watch people? Just watch. Just observe. See how people are incapable of functioning socially unless they're constantly reminding themselves who and what they are in terms of social category. To use gender as an example. See, as a human being, sitting alone in silence, or doing whatever you're doing, you know who you are. You are what you are. It isn't until you're in social company that everybody starts reminding everybody else of what their categoric labels are. If somebody needs to constantly remind themselves, I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man, in order to navigate the social world, that's a rotten brain. If someone has to constantly remind themselves, I'm a woman, to navigate the world, see, when you simply are what you are, right? What? There's no impediment. But you're in the world, and people with very low consciousness will look at you, and for some reason, they need to remind you of your biological sex, or they need to remind you of your race, they need to remind you of your color, they need to remind you of something, they need to remind you of your height, they need to remind you of your weight, they need to remind you. Why? Because they're unconscious. They're living in mechanical, robotic consciousness. They don't know what else to do. All they know is what they see directly. And not even that, because they only see in accordance with their social conditioning. And so when you are living as a socially conditioned being, you're only capable of looking at things categorically, which means you're not capable of being with anything, looking at anything the way it is. And this is the problem. And living as a socially conditioned being is living as both an exploiter and as one who's being exploited. And they're both happening unconsciously. So, I invite you to contemplate what I've been speaking about here. I hope it's been clear. Whenever I speak, here's my problem. Whenever I problem or not, whenever I speak, I never quite feel I've said what I needed to say the way I needed to say it. I always feel like I haven't been clear, and maybe I have been clear. Sometimes when I go back and re-listen to myself, I see, oh, that actually was very clear, or I left something out, or it could have been more spruced up or refined over here. But if I don't simply speak and get it out the way it comes out, then not only do I feel that I've stepped out of the flow, but then I never talk, I never say anything, because of that wanting to say the right thing the right way in order to actually get what I'm saying. I have something to say. I'm trying to point to something here. I'm not just giving philosophies and opinions and ideas about... I see something very clearly, and the seeing is a very whole, total, holistic... I see the whole of space and time, and words are only one at a time. And I see multidimensionally, and words are very monodimensional. Poetry and mythology, the mythological language, is the most multidimensional that human language can be. But trying to put into words what I see never feels adequate or sufficient to me. So I just say this because this seeing anyway, which is here bestowed, it's a funny way to put it, is the natural capacity and birthright of every human being, and so it's the seeing itself that I'm pointing toward. But for the sake of talking, I have to try to translate it into words, and it's not always easy. Like I said, in fact, it never really feels adequate. So I could keep going and going and going, and I could try to use all of my linguistic prowess and powers to try to cobble together an image which is sufficient to attempt to shine light or to convey what it is that I see, which ultimately can't be conveyed in words. Even if books and books and books were written, there would always be something more to say, something more to add, when words are the medium of conveyance. But there is a very practical, basic thing which can essentially be conveyed in words. The problem is, if it could be absolutely conveyed in words, there would be no question. But because it can't be absolutely conveyed in words, when it is attempted to be communicated verbally, it's very easy for the socially conditioned mind, the socially conditioned consciousness, the socially conditioned brain to pop up and try to attack what sounds ridiculous from the perspective of the conditioned brain, but from within the unconditioned mind is clearly seen as being the nature of what is. So, and that's what I'm always trying to convey with everything that I am, is that unconditioned, unbound, unfettered, free, conscious awareness of the nature of being, of the nature of the source of creation itself, and our inseparability from that. And what that means, insofar as how we're living upon this planet and with one another, our relationship to the world, our relationship to one another, and how our entire psychosocial structure is a total failure in relationship. And we internalize that and see ourselves through that distorted lens, which causes us to internalize the whole exploitation, which becomes self-exploitation and self-hatred, and we end up thinking that there's something wrong with us for being how we are naturally, and then we, do all kinds of strange things to try to fix ourselves, to try to. And it's one thing to see, trauma, and to see the need to move through, or what we would call integrate, to understand the trauma. But then that requires understanding the source of all trauma, and the willingness to return to one's natural state, which is always right here, by the way. And that's the gift of realization, is that the natural self is simply, it's always here. There may be a psychological cover of trauma, of suffering, of violence, of pain that covers that. But that cover of trauma can never corrupt, can never actually harm the soul, can never harm the true self. And so the true self is always accessible. It's just covered, but it's always accessible, and it's very immediately accessible. In fact, you don't have to do anything to access it. It's already self-accessed. It just requires stepping back and seeing that which you are not, which is the conditioning. You're not the conditioning. But the game of the psychosocial structure, which is the exploitative one in which we live, its game is that you are the conditioning. And so to see that lie is the beginning of wisdom, is the beginning of the perception of truth. And so it's to see it clearly, which is seeing that everybody is truly free, but everybody feels themselves to be in this trap on all so-called sides of the equation. Everyone is caught in the same hell and projecting outward, and there's all this war for no reason, for absolutely no reason, because everybody refuses to surrender to the truth of what they really are, which can never be a socially contrived thing. Whether it's mainstream cultural or countercultural or anti-cultural, it's all contrived. One may seem more complex and nuanced than another, but it's all contrived, because finally what you are can't be said. And so to whatever degree you find in your current situation any psychological box or construct helpful for the navigation, it's just putting one stone in front of you so that you can use as a stepping stone and walk, but then you have to let it go as you make your steps forward. And so all categorical labels, while they may be temporarily useful in one's apparent journey, they all become just dead weights that need to be let go of sooner or later. And so I'm pointing toward that which is, I don't want to say at the end of the journey, but because the journey will keep going until you realize that what you're looking for is already here, and that no journey is necessary unless you want to take a journey. Journeying is quite fun, but that which you're looking for at the end of the journey you already are. And the willingness to realize that is the willingness to let go of all of the valuation systems of the sick culture, telling you that you have to work for your freedom, you have to work for your liberation. Liberation is the nature of your being. People put a price tag on what isn't theirs to sell. And then here we are. So I hope we're understanding each other. And of course, this is what I'm here for. This is why this incarnation is present. All incarnations are here for celebration of being itself. Everything that is living celebration. Every particular manifestation is living consciousness, which is celebration of itself. But insofar as this particular role is concerned, of being here and interacting with you like this, this is for the offering of the invitation to return home to the truth of who and what you are in silence, so that, which is, it's your ticket to freedom. You don't have to feel inadequate. You don't have to feel less than. You don't have to feel like you've missed out. You don't have to feel like you're not enough. Because none of that's true. And I pray with everything in me that you come home to that truth as quickly as possible, for your well-being and for the well-being of all. So, I'm here, and I look forward to having more of these talks with you. Please always feel free to ask questions, to ask for clarification. For me, this is a dialogue. It's a conversation. You know, I'm saying what I see, but again, what is here is really beyond words. Bits and pieces can be attempted to be put into words, and like I said, but to the extent that language is being used, you know, if you see what I'm pointing at, if the words are a suitable vehicle to catapult you into the wordless awareness, then the words have served their purpose, because the end of all words is silence. All language leads to silence. But to the extent that you are with the words and perhaps needing clarification, then you're always welcome to ask questions. So I think it's time that I cut this video. I think I might walk to the store and grab some ice cream. Peace and blessings. Much love.